hello. The microphone's on. How's everybody doing this morning?
Great.
Yeah? Ready to roll? Well, welcome, everybody. I do know that we're going to have Mary will be calling in when she's available to participate via the phone. Hopefully, everybody's up and ready to go. We're going to kind of dive right into the agenda and see where that takes us, take a break at some point, and work through the agenda. We got a few things we got to make some decisions on today. Welcome the guests that are out in the gallery. I'll wave at everybody, so thanks for being here. If you are, anytime that you have, you want to participate in the discussion, whether you're up here or you're out in the gallery, please come to a microphone so that we can hear you and make sure that your voice is heard and that we can have a good discussion today. So if we're all on board to move forward, we're going to dive right into the agenda. Everybody good with that? We're moving today, okay? All right. Basically, we've got a pretty good agenda, and it probably looks a lot fuller than it is. We've got some topics that'll go a little bit quicker, and some of them we do need to close out on. The email meeting that the committee had, we'll do that during this meeting as well. But the first order of business is to actually take a look at our June 25th minutes. They were sent out to the committee, so I just need to find out if everybody had a chance to review them, or you should have a copy with you. Were there any adjustments? Carolyn?
Next to the last page, the critical decision point for the discussion of the FAAC involvement in data collection. It says Carolyn Mallard, it says Carolyn Jones with volunteers.
Okay, let me, wait.
Next to the last page.
Got it, I'm there.
Block,
Yeah.
the subcommittee.
Oh, okay, so that was you instead of Carolyn Mallory.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we need to make that adjustment. Because Carolyn Jones is the one that volunteered, although I'm sure Carolyn Mallory would be happy to serve if we didn't catch that.
I can help.
Any other adjustments to the minutes? Yes, sir.
I believe I attended via teleconference,
Yeah, you did.
and I show to be absent.
Well, we don't want that, so Marcus was here via conference call. Okay.
On the last page, critical discussion points at the top, it says be on top instead of be on time. So it's like,
I'm not sure how I feel about that. Where's the, we're okay, let me look at the last page. We would have liked it to be on top, but it didn't quite work out that way, did it? Okay. Be on time, okay. And it's TEOG, right? Not TEGO, TEGO? That's okay. I kind of like that, TEGO, Lego, right? Okay, just kidding, sorry.
I've been asked to remind everyone to turn your mic on when you're speaking.
Yep, please turn on your mic. Any other corrections to the minutes? Okay, I need a motion to accept the minutes as amended by the corrections.
Made.
Marcus, second. Carolyn, second. All approved, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, minutes are passed. Great, with the corrections, so we'll get those corrections made. All right, fantastic. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Chad for the Student Financial Aid Program updates.
Great, thank you. Just wanted to let you all know some stuff that's going on in student financial aid programs. One, we have contracted with 5280, part of the Nelnet network, and we'll be replacing our loan software. We're actually upgrading to a new version that they have, and the new version is going to allow us to make some significant improvements to our processing, to our customer-facing environment, things like that. Fortunately, it's because we're going with a newer version of the same software, it's more of a migration than an implementation. So the transition should be much easier with this, but we look forward to being able to achieve a lot of improvements. I'm going to be looking at, how the interaction in terms of students submitting applications, you all certifying applications, as well as the back end on how we're processing. And so just wanted to let you know that that is going to be happening over the course of the next about 17, 18 months. Our goal is January 2017 go live date, and we will definitely have more information out to you as we get closer to that to make sure that when we do go live, you already have the information and training that you need to be able to feel comfortable using it. I want to make sure that when we go live, it's not something that suddenly surprises everybody, but that you've got the pieces that you need for that. So more to come on that, but just wanted you to be aware. Speaking of training, wanted to follow up on what I talked about at the last meeting. I actually have been working with Human Resources, and hopefully in the next couple weeks, we're going to be finalizing the trainer position that I had talked to you all about at the last meeting. It's actually grown a bit since we last talked. The trainer is actually going to be one of our managers. We're going to hire a manager who will oversee a team of 3 individuals who are going to be focused specifically on supporting schools. So we'll have 3 financial aid service representatives and this manager who are going to focus on things that I talked about before, like developing a Texas Student Aid handbook, developing a more effective, what's the word I'm looking for? Web portal. That's the 2 words I was looking for. A more effective web portal for everyone so that you can kind of go to one place and get everything you need, call one number and get everything you need. And so we are very much looking forward to being able to build some stronger resources. We're restructuring within student financial aid programs to have 2 units within the organization, one focused on borrower services. So our former loan program operations is being renamed Borrower Services and is going to focus specifically on the borrowers, and another named Financial Aid Services that is going to focus specifically on the schools. And so we're restructuring around that, and we're restructuring positions within our organization so that they will focus more on skill base rather than program base. So people that are focused specifically on customer service and being able to answer all of your questions about programs, as opposed to having one person who's TOG, one person who's TEG, et cetera. And then we'll have people in the background that are focused on the processing aspects for all of the programs. So we think that focusing on skill base and organizing around customer base is going to allow us to improve the services that we provide to schools, that we provide to students, that we provide to borrowers as a whole. So I look forward to being able to post those positions. I look forward to you all encouraging people that you know that would be good for those positions to apply for those positions. And we are looking forward to making some changes over the coming 6 months. I think that's...
Can I ask a question? Yes?
Am I allowed to say no?
No. Okay, so one of the things with, and this is just in line with kind of talking about the customer service piece,
Yep.
the whole state authorization deal that's out there. I'm assuming that you guys have someone designated for customer complaints. Is that part of this group, or is that part of something else?
That's actually a separate
thing?
a
Okay,
separate
all right.
person, because that is in relation to, like, financial aid services is focused on schools related to financial aid.
Okay.
There are a lot of school relations that occur throughout the entire agency.
Okay.
And so one of our staff in the college readiness and success area is specifically charged with the complaint process. I sent out some information to the TASFA listserv a little while ago
Okay.
with details about how that process works. And, excuse me, we're actually looking at taking advantage of some of the software and technology that we have within the agency to improve the customer complaint process, so that if a student needs to file something formal, being able to move through that process more effectively.
Great. Perfect. All right. Anybody else have any questions for Chad about updates? Making a lot of really good changes. I think I like the idea of schools having someone that they can contact and the training piece, so I think we can look forward to some really great things. This committee can really help advise and help with that, so that's awesome.
I look forward to that.
Sarcastic?
No,
Is
it's
it-
not
Okay,
sarcastic.
just want to make sure. Okay, any other questions? All right, I'm going to turn it over to our next agenda item, which is on the new processing for grants and special programs, right? Desha? Yep.
Yes. You all should have in front of you the 2015-16 institutional calendar as a handout. I wanted to go over some of the dates that we have set for the end-of-year reporting, and if you can focus your attention on at least the months of May, June, and July, which are the dates that I want to go over. As you can see in May, there's a deadline date that is set for May 1st to submit a summer update file. The reason for this particular deadline date is during the end-of-year process, we have a lot of common errors that come up, and this is actually one of them, which has to deal with the prior year SAP. And typically, in order to make any changes to that prior year SAP, the summer update file is usually the best way to make those corrections. We found that having to do the summer update file at the same time as trying to submit your end of year certification does cause some delay. So the goal is to try to have that done prior to actually submitting your end of year. That will allow you some additional time to actually work on the end of year and not have that particular common error for prior SAP come up. So we've set that as a May 1st particular deadline. We do have some other target dates that are throughout the calendar that can guide the institutions to actually completing the summer update file well before May 1st. You can definitely do it before May 1st. You can also do the award history file prior to. So we're trying to encourage all institutions to submit the summer update file well in advance, and again, just to avoid those common errors that do come up on there. We have the next date set in June. We have June 17th as a deadline date for submitting the end-of-year reporting for Texas Work Study, as well as for Top 10. Our goal last year was to stagger our deadline dates throughout the summer. We did notice that the two-year institutions did have 4 programs that they had to report on, which was TEOG, Texas Grant, Top 10, as well as Work Study. So here we're trying to stagger a little bit better based upon the institution types. You will see that June 17th, you'll be allowed to submit your Top 10, and that would be for the public institutions, and then for Work Study would be for all institutions. And between June 17th and July 1st is when you can work on maybe your major programs that will come up, which will be TEG, TEOG, as well as Texas Grant for the public universities. And so moving into the next month, which will be July, you'll have 2 dates that are set in there, July 1st and July 15th. July 1st, which I mentioned earlier, would be for those other programs, TEG, TEOG, as well as Texas Grants. And then July 15th would be for the community colleges, Lamar's and TSTCs to submit their Texas Grant. So again, the goal is to try to get institutions to be able to complete their end-of-year reporting relatively on time. This past fiscal year, we did have institutions that were going beyond the deadline dates that were set for the 14-15 academic year and brought well into the month of August. So here we're just trying to ensure that we can get those end-of-year reports done, and in the event something comes up, definitely communicate to us, but it gives us that cushion time well before July 31st to help any institutions who may be having some difficulty at that time. So we definitely solicit any kind of feedback that you may have on these particular set deadline dates that we have for end of year.
So I have a quick question. In October, and I don't know about TEOG, but for Texas Grant, it says in here that that's the earliest date institutions may set for renewal students to complete their application. I thought that rule changed. we
It
can
did.
set an
This is,
earlier date.
It did. This is just a draft, so I think there's one other item that I do need to clean up, but we can make a change to that for October.
Okay, yeah, because
Yes. Yes, and that's why I definitely want you all to look at it.
Because we,
Yes.
you can set it as early as your March 15th
Correct.
deadline, right?
Correct,
Okay.
yes. And that's why I want you guys to put your eyes on it first before we actually published it to the institutions and put it on our webpage in case we
Okay.
did miss something in completing this calendar.
Interesting enough, we might need, with the prior year coming, it's not coming until next year.
17, 18. I was going to ask if this might be a time to talk about that a little bit and
Sure.
in what we might
might be.
expect or how, because we've already started talking at our campuses about a real shift
Yeah.
in a lot of awarding and things like that, and pressures that will come from administration now as well, because students can file earlier.
Yeah, I think and I'm not sure, we're gonna have to really think about it, especially when you think about the allocation process that we normally have here. Because now the FAFSAs are gonna be available, and the FAFSAs are gonna be available based on everything by October of next year for the fall 17 year. So most of the institutions on the listservs that we're seeing, and I know this is what I want to do because overseeing admissions and recruitment, it's a yield tool to be able to do award letters as early as November 1 once students start submitting their FAFSA. So the idea is they're going to be using that prior year. So for example, okay, I got to get my years straight. In years past, for 17, 18, they would use their 16 taxes. Now they're going to be using their 2015 taxes. So that's the concept behind prior year. So we're all on the same page there, right? So now we're really going to have to think about this, because if I don't know what my allocation is going to be, and in light of cuts that some of us took this year, it could be a bit of a challenge, because we want to get early awards out to freshmen and transfer students to try to yield them for a recruitment effort. I plan on sending out award letters November 1st. So we're really going to have to think about allocations don't come out until February, March. Is it possible? I know the year of the legislative session might be a challenge, or this might be something that we need to bring up at the next legislative session to possibly look at how we can make this change. It's going to be a great tool for parents and students to be able to apply that early. As soon as they apply for admission, they can also find out what they might be eligible for aid. But if we're sitting there wondering whether we're going to have Texas grant funding or TEOG funding or anything like that, we're going to be taking a risk if we go out and package. And most of us want to package that early. A lot of us do. It's going to change the whole cycle of financial aid.
I'm wondering if it'd be possible to pursue a hold harmless amount, that a bare minimum that we know from year to year an institution's going to have, based upon if whatever criteria is not met, then that allocation would be decreased maybe, but no more than like 10% per year. So that, again, we kind of have an idea going forward. You've got at least this amount, and knowing that, and that's kind of how SEOG is calculated too. There's that minimum calculation, and then you've got the additional that can come in, but something at least so the schools have a target to work for as a minimum, and then as additional funds are available, then you kind of go to town. It limits the exposure that the schools are going to have, and also then gives them the ability to make some decisions early on for the students.
Anybody else have anything that you want to say about it? Thoughts, suggestions?
I'm also wondering if it's going to change the priority deadline dates.
I'm sorry, say that again?
If it's going to change the priority deadline dates.
We'll have to think about that, because right now it's March 15th. If we start packaging in October, and I would imagine we're not just going to want to do it for new students. It's a good retention tool as well, right? If they know before they head into their spring semester what they might get next year, barring satisfactory academic progress and things like that, it's a great recruitment and retention tool, and it also gives reassurance to the parents and students. So we're going to have to really rethink state, how we do state aid, the priority deadline, allocation. I know that we're limited with legislative sessions, and lucky us, that's the legislative year, right? 17, spring 17. Dang it! Yeah. But it's going to change the whole cycle of how we package. So we're going to have to figure out some kind of mechanism, like Marcus said, with some kind of tentative funding. And then if we're going to be starting to package in October for the next fall, that priority deadline might need to move up. Maybe.
And just one concern I have about moving the priority deadline too early is that we still have a number of students that are low socioeconomic and apply late as it is. And so bumping that up too early is going to put more of them out, or maybe we need to be working more with the high schools in some of those efforts in terms of better educating that population that they need to apply early. Not that we're not already doing that, we just may need to increase our efforts.
Is it too early to consider maybe a subcommittee of this group looking at some of those thoughts? I think it's a great group, but it's pretty good size. And maybe meeting outside of this time to put some thoughts together. And again, this is very, very, very early, but I don't think it is too early at all, because this is going to hit us quick.
There's a couple points to think about. One, we have an upcoming negotiated rulemaking committee for Texas grants specifically. Now, we are talking about other programs as well, so any change in allocation, we would have to open up to negotiated rulemaking, which is feasible. And certainly we're open to looking at all the impacts within this. Legislation is a key point. So you have one out of every 2 years. We're going to be up against that barrier that we don't really know until the governor signs the bill to be able to fully commit. Hold harmless on any one of our rules is a possibility if that's what the negotiated committee comes up and wants to do. So keep those items in mind. That's why I bring this up. The TG, it's very apropos that if we wanted to, Chad's already looked at certain items and scenarios for that upcoming committee, and certainly welcome feedback to either hold harmless or other integration or change in priority deadline. That would be the time to be able to make those changes for at least that one program. Then we'd have to look at TEG, TEOG, et cetera.
And I think it'll be really important for us to think, I don't know if the hold harmless, we've talked about that for several years, getting an early indication, maybe only if we don't think there's going to be any major cuts to some of the programs, because there's data out there to support what the retention rates are, right? So we've been putting that data into the financial aid database for years. That's been kind of one of the things we've discussed. Why can't we find out at least a tentative funding, a portion, maybe setting aside 60% of what we anticipate, even in a legislative year. I know it's a big risk, or maybe that percentage is lower for that particular year. Like we say, you know what, of the current allocation, we can go out and tentatively set 50% of it so we have something, or we're all just going to have to take a risk. And now we're pushed to do something. So we might have to, that might be a good part of that'd be a good part of the discussion when we're talking about the allocation process and how that's going to work, because it's going to change. It's going to rock our world a little bit. It's a good thing, but it's going to be a big change in how we do business. So,
is there anything within regulation now, based upon how need is calculated, that prior year would be a problem? Need of the programs, I believe it's all tied to the federal requirements, but I'm wondering if there's anything specifically in there saying, that again, prior would create an issue.
Right now, I believe, and I'll be honest that I haven't delved into this deeply because I wanted to let it kind of mull around in your heads for a little while in order to be able to get some of your reactions.
it's mulling all right.
And because I have my thoughts on it, but I'm not in an office anymore, and I wanted to make sure I was thinking about the pieces that you're thinking about. I believe most everything is EFC specific, so as long as the federal government continues to produce an EFC, then we're okay. Should there ever be traction for some of the other ideas that have existed or have been proposed over the years of, moving away from even an EFC and it just being a Pell eligibility indicator, or something like that, then we would definitely have to, be looking all the way back to the statute to figure out what do we need to change. But as long as the federal government continues to produce an EFC, in theory, our statutes will continue to work. And, there's, hearing you talk about all the different pieces, there are so many different items this can affect. Even thinking about the idea of, if we're going to do earlier allocations or things like that, then we would need to think about, how do we handle the FADs and making sure we have the data in time. If we want November allocations, but we don't have FADs data till December, then that's going to be a problem there. So there's a whole kind of domino effect to this whole thing. If you all are interested, I think a subcommittee focused on this would be extremely helpful to the agency to really get at what are the ways that things will be impacting the schools, so that we can also be looking at, okay, and what is that impact on our side, and try to make sure that we have something in place in time for when this takes effect.
Just one thought, and I know in terms of allocations for state funds, it becomes problematic during a legislative time. But could we, because I think typically the data that's used to make the allocations based on institution doesn't change that dramatically from one year to the next. Could we, or are there prohibitions to doing so, just set an allocation for 2 years? So we know during the biennium what our allocation will be in year one and year two. And that really allows us to plan, and I think we could probably do some data analysis and determine, is there a large variance between one year and another, i.e. perhaps our allocation wouldn't change that much, and we could just set that proactively? Just a thought.
Yeah, and at least to have, continue at least have that base amount, if we could have the base amount, because, anything would be icing on the cake if we were, after everything shaked out, if we could get more money, but at least to be able to cover what we've at least spent prior year, and having the 2 years would help.
And maybe have that base amount possibly during the legislative session. We don't know,
Right.
but we can assume there won't be dramatic cuts, but at least have a base amount. But in the 2 years that we do know the allocation, we can at least have one allocation set for 2 years. I think that would help us really better meet the needs of the students and plan proactively and address the early FAFSA deadline.
Is that something we can actually talk about on October 6th, or are we just talking about, can we add that to the discussion, to the negotiated rulemaking?
I believe we can. We'll look into
Okay.
it, but I believe we can.
Okay. So that we can actually bring up at the negotiated rulemaking. Hopefully, we'll clarify that we can do that. That may be up for discussion.
Yeah, I'll look into that.
Okay.
Sorry. I'll look into that because there's some pieces I'd want to make sure that there's not other changes that have to happen in order to get to that point. And so, yeah.
Okay.
We'll need to look at what we published on the Texas Register, et cetera, to make sure that that would be within scope. Otherwise, we may have to repost, et cetera, and it may change timelines.
And we can, and honestly, it might be more beneficial for a subcommittee to kind of put together all of the ideas and maybe do a separate, because I think what we're trying to do at this next one is to actually talk about the formula, right, more than anything. From my perspective, that's what we got to talk about, the actual formula for the allocation, and then maybe we need to do a separate one for the impact and the timing.
And I think it's important to keep in mind that the negotiated rulemaking that's coming up is Texas grant specific, whereas what it sounds like you all are talking about are all of the programs to which we allocate money. And so we'll need to make sure we think about that.
Okay, so are we all in agreement that we'd like to create a subcommittee? Any volunteers? Jaleesa? Chris? Harold? Yeah? Oh, yeah. Harold?
Actually, because you don't have to be on.
Yeah, this is just like a subcommittee. We can take volunteers that aren't part of the committee, right?
Yes, subcommittees can have people who aren't part of the main committee.
Okay, Marcus, I just added you to the list. Anybody else?
I'd like to.
Berlin?
Just
And
Voice
Audrey?
for Families and Students.
Got it. And Zelma. Okay. Well, then perhaps we should just make it a committee topic at the next meeting? Yes. And Diane? Okay. Okay. Who can I get to volunteer to lead that effort? Chris? Would you be willing to lead that effort?
I second.
Okay. So Chris, I'll get you the list of names, and then you can kind of start forming that group and getting them together to have conversations about that. Fantastic. All right. Anything else? We good? All right, thank you. All right, next, item D, update on TG pilot project. George Torres, you ready?
Yeah, let me introduce Chris Scott, who's coming to the table. Chris is the director of the pilot program. He's been there, I think, maybe 3 or 4 weeks.
Welcome.
And, I mean, he's been with TG several years, but he was appointed to head up the pilot program about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he's done a great job so far in getting us caught up. And so there's a short list of slides in your material, and so Scott, take it away.
Thank you, George. Good morning, committee. Thank you for having me. I've had the pleasure of meeting a number of you over my 8 years at TG. Others of you I have not. I've had a number of roles there, and as George mentioned, I've most recently been asked to come in and lead the operational team that's responsible for delivering the pilot. So, again, thanks for having me. I'm going to give you a short update today, and let's see how this goes. So I think you're probably all aware that the legislature in 2013 passed Senate Bill 680 to establish the Texas Student Loan Default Prevention and Financial Literacy Pilot Program. That's a mouthful. We shortened it a little bit on the slide. The pilot is really about 3 key things. It's about helping educate borrowers to become more informed financial consumers of financial aid information. Specifically, the pilot seeks to help borrowers understand the consequences of borrowing to finance their education. It seeks to help them understand the consequences of their academic and career choices, and it helps them develop strategies for avoiding student loan default. So in a nutshell, it's really about helping students make better decisions about going to college, about when they get to college, making them go through the exercise of understanding, this is my chosen career path, this is how much it's going to cost me to attend school, this is how much I can really afford to borrow based on what I expect to earn when I leave the pilot, and overall creating a more informed financial consumer early on in the college-going process, as opposed to having them wait till they're out of school to figure out, okay, I borrowed a bunch of money, now how am I going to pay it all back, okay? And we're really focusing on providing information to students when they first get to school, again, as opposed to waiting until they've been there a while. And at this point, the coordinating board has asked TG to help operate the pilot, and so that's why I'm here today. And by the way, I'm going to invite George to jump in and correct me if I get anything wrong or if he has anything to add, because he's obviously been more involved with this for a longer period of time than I have. But in terms of the schools that are involved, the legislation specifically spelled out the criteria for involving 4 institutions. Basically, there was 1 institution required from each of the 4 sectors, 4-year public, 4-year not-for-profit private, 2-year public, and 4-year for-profit. TG and the coordinating board agreed to include up to 12 schools to hopefully have a bigger impact and create some more interesting case studies. In terms of criteria for inclusion, the legislation specifically said that a school had to have a cohort default rate of 20% or greater, or an average CDR growth that's above the state average, which turned out to be 1.71 percentage points. So there were 144 schools that were actually eligible for the pilot. Once our research group ran the numbers, 144 schools, you can see a breakout of where those numbers fell. At this point, we have 11 institutions participating, and those are up on the screen for you. We have 3 each from the first 3 categories and 2 for-profit schools. So these are the schools that are currently committed to the program and are participating and moving forward. And so now I'd like to give you a quick overview of the main features of the pilot. There are really 6 features in total, and these are all enumerated partially from the legislation and partially in a memorandum of understanding between TG and the coordinating board. The first 4 features are in operation today, and they include default prevention plans, student financial education and loan counseling, college-going tips and emails, and financial coaching. And I'm going to walk you through what each of those means specifically in just a moment. We have 2 other features that are still in development, and those include integrated advising and reports and assessments, basically an overall assessment of the effectiveness of the pilot from both the student knowledge transfer, behavior change, and implementation assessment of how the institutions did in implementing the pilot. So, the first feature is default prevention plans. Default prevention plans are something that TG has been doing for quite some time. And what it really involves is our consultants going out and visiting with the schools and helping schools really analyze their prior cohort data to understand where their real problem areas lie in terms of default. This means looking at prior cohort default rates and understanding what are the subgroups that have specific problems. This may be a particular program. I think we all know that non-completers are obviously a big issue, but when it comes to focusing limited resources on particular segments of students while they're still in school before they leave school, that's what this part is about, trying to identify those. So whether it's on a program basis, students that are experiencing or on satisfactory academic progress, et cetera, we dive down deep and help identify those students and then come up with recommendations for the institution on how to target those students while they're still in school to create an intervention. The second phase of the plan is we go in and we bring together different groups from across campus because default is much more than just a financial aid problem. It involves student services, registrar, a variety of different groups from across campus. We really strive to bring those groups together to the table to talk about the fact that they're all involved in creating a campus community to help prevent student loan default and create more financial education across campus. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in terms of the integrated advising feature in just a few minutes. Throughout the plan, or throughout the pilot process, TG continues to work with the school to continue to evaluate that cohort default rate information. Are there shifts in the patterns? Are we being effective at targeting those specific subgroups that we identified initially? What changes in strategy do we need to make to continue to be the most effective with frankly, a limited amount of resources at most institutions? How do we measure the effectiveness of default prevention plans? Well, this one's a very high level in nature. It's at the institution level. And so obviously completion and acceptance of the plan is a good first step towards an indicator that the schools are really bought into the concept of changing things on campus. Over the long term, we obviously hope that the entire pilot program helps to reduce cohort default rates. That's kind of a longer term result. What makes this feature different from other things that have been going on in the world of default prevention, let's say over a number of years? Well, really, this gets back to the focus of the pilot working with students while they're still in school. Traditionally, default prevention has been something that was conducted when students left school. It was more of a reactive approach. Now we're trying to make things proactive and again, targeting students while they're still on campus and we have a chance to educate them before they leave. We also believe the facilitation of the cross-campus committee is an important piece as well because, again, default prevention is more than just a financial aid problem. That's the first feature, is default prevention plans. The next feature is student financial education and loan counseling. This is more commonly referred to as financial literacy. TG has identified a group of 8 specific financial literacy modules that are part of our student financial education program that we believe are specifically relevant to the pilot and students that attend institutions involved in the pilot. You can see those modules on the sheet in front of you. Really, it's about the modules are tied to those goals of the pilot, creating more informed students. What's the borrowing process? How much should I borrow? How do I know to find out how much I owe? How do I set up a spending plan? How do I understand a budget? All things that keep students from coming back and asking for more money later, trying to create a spending plan up front so they understand what their budget really is. We also have a number of up to 13, I believe, additional modules that are also available to schools, but our goal is to go in and train individuals at each institution on these 8 core modules, and we offer that in 2 different formats. First is an in-person format where we have actually sent out our trainers to each institution thus far and train a variety of people on how to deliver our materials in person to students on campus. We also, as a secondary, offer an online training center, gives both educators and students a way to access the material online. It's a more of a kind of a pre-recorded format, walks the students through the module. But we believe the most effective delivery of the materials is, again, though, in person. So we're working with schools constantly trying to figure out, okay, what is the best way to incorporate these financial education materials into the classroom, into curriculum, whether it's part of a first-year student experience course, some kind of financial education course, et cetera. That's really where we're going to hit a home run if we can get these courses incorporated into the classroom. So as we're going to continue to develop modules throughout the pilot, and one of them is specifically related to that idea of integrated advising, and we're rolling out a new module later this fall that's focused on making successful college, career, and repayment choices, kind of tying all these things together. Many of you may be seeing our major choices tool out on the internet about helping students understand debt-to-income ratios, expected earnings when it comes to a particular major at a particular institution. This module is really about teaching students how to be better consumers of that type of information and really trying to get them to have that, what's really kind of a complicated self-discussion to understand, okay, this is where I'm headed in life, this is my current career path, and this is what I can really expect to earn when I get out of college. As I mentioned before, when our trainers have been out to the institutions, we've trained a variety of different people, far more than just financial aid. We've trained academic and career advisors, student services, peer advisors, again, really trying to spread out the wealth of knowledge across the institution to help reach as many students as possible. How do we assess the effectiveness of this feature? Number one is by how many modules can we deliver to how many students? How many student interactions can we create by training individuals at the institution and having them deliver the content? Knowledge gained, we do each module includes both a pre-test and a post-test, and so we're assessing immediately after the course if a student answered 3 of 5 questions correctly up front, can they at least answer 4 of 5 questions or 5 of 5 questions immediately after the module? And then later on, we're working to implement a behavior modification survey to really assess over time, does this education curriculum, financial education curriculum, does it really have an impact? Are students changing their behaviors because of this? And we're working to implement that feature as we go forward. Differentiators, we think our train-the-trainer approach is fairly unique in the world of financial literacy, and we've seen definite success with that over time. The courses are also very interactive. Each one of them contains some sort of game or interactive activity to help the facilitator really engage the students in the content. And I've sat through them myself, and they're actually very engaging and helpful and get the students thinking about the content that they just experienced. The third feature is financial and college-going tips and articles. That's a mouthful, so we like to call it the Mighty Money Minute. And it's really a series of emails and articles that go out to students on a monthly basis. And the unique thing about them is they are timed to correspond with significant events in a student's life throughout the year. So perhaps when they're in the first month of school and they're just arriving on campus, we'll send a communication about building a budget. When's the best time to build a budget? Is at the beginning of the year when you understand how much money you're going to have and have a good guess about how much it's going to cost you. That way you can understand what your surplus is and how much you can afford to spend on a monthly basis to get you through the year without having to either go get a credit card or go back and ask for more financial aid. Currently, those emails and tips are actually delivered in more than just one format. We're delivering it via email and text message. Those messages are sent to the schools, and the schools are working with us to help push those out to their populations. How do we judge the effectiveness of this? Right now, we're looking at activity. How many students are reading these emails? How many are opening and clicking through the content? Basic web metrics is what we're looking at right now. As we progress further, we'll look to implement surveys again to see if students are what's the word I'm looking for? To make sure students are taking in the information that's presented and understanding it. So, again, what makes this different? We think the timing aspect that I described up front is very different, trying to time these things with important events throughout the year. And also, we call that just-in-time education. and also the multi-channel delivery, trying to reach students where they are. As if you look at the metrics these days, students are quickly moving away from email already, so we're trying to incorporate text messaging, social media. We're encouraging schools to post, not only send out via email, but post the materials to their Facebook or Twitter accounts, and we're tracking those metrics, trying to understand where the best consumption comes from. Number 4 is financial coaching, and this one is by far my favorite feature of the pilot because I believe it hits the closest to home and is the most unique, I believe. What this involves is each of the schools, well, this feature was initially rolled out to 4 of our pilot schools. We've recently rolled it out to all 12 in the process of doing that. What this really is working with the institutions that are participating. We're identifying specific subgroups of at-risk students. And when those students are engaged with, the school is referring them over to us for financial coaching. Texas State's been a huge proponent of this thus far. We really appreciate the dedication they put into this feature, and we're starting to see some really good results. But what it's about is getting students to have a coordinated, planned, scheduled, one-on-one coaching activity with one of our trained financial education coaches. So the school refers them to us, the student reaches out and schedules an appointment. It's an online appointment. We'll send them some pre-work, basically some worksheets to try to help them develop a budget, and then we'll spend generally 45 minutes to an hour with them on a one-on-one web-based format, going through their monthly budget, their spending plan, their financial, basically their financial situation, and trying to help them walk away with a real spending plan. And it's really cool because students walk away from it with, this is great, I didn't know how to do this. We're getting some really appreciative comments from students, and we think this is going to be one of the most effective features as we continue to go forward through the pilot. Each session generally results in a student walking away with a spending plan. And one of the unique things about this is, though, that students can help request specific topics before they come to the meeting. So they may need help paying a specific bill, they may need general help in managing their money, they may want to talk about expected debt to earnings. We have about 8 different topics that they can choose from, and our counselors are really good at tailoring the conversation to address those topics, but still helping move that student towards building out that spending plan, because we believe that's the one common element that everyone can benefit from. How do we assess the effectiveness of financial coaching? First of all, we're doing a post-session survey. Did you feel like you learned anything through this session? Did the coaching kind of meet you where you're at? Did you walk away with something useful? As we go through time, we're going to look to implement a behavior change survey. So, 6 months, a year down the road, did that student really stick to that spending plan? Did they change their behaviors? Are they borrowing less? Important metrics to know that is the pilot really affecting the way students are behaving. The differentiators, excuse me, we have AFCPE trained and credentialed coaches. I'm going to get this wrong, but I think AFCPE is the Association for Financial Coaching and Planning, and I'm not sure what the E is at the moment. Oh, maybe Financial Coaching and Planning Education. Let's go with that for now, and I'll correct it next time. But basically, all of our coaches are either in the process of or already have gained their AFCPE designation. It's a well-known designation in the financial coaching world. Again, this is not financial planning, but it's financial coaching. And we believe that having a higher level of knowledge for our coaches is really, really valuable, and we're encouraging each of them to obtain that certification. And also, I mentioned the personal one-on-one interaction, really spending up to an hour with a student to really help them walk through their personal finances. So, in terms of a feature that's under development, this is number 5, integrated advising. Integrated advising is really about getting 3 key offices on campus to really have the same message to students. And those offices are financial aid, academic advising, and career services. Getting those groups together to talk so that they can have a consistent message when they see a troubled student come in the door. And we believe that by kind of raising the bar a little bit and getting people to deliver a consistent message is going to help students be able to make more informed choices. And really the question is, how do I effectively pay for college? And if each of those 3 groups can be on the same page, we think it's going to make a difference in the lives of students. This is really an emerging topic. It's been one that there's been some research done about, some research completed, and we're looking to further that research and really not quite change the overall dynamic, but get students in a more, well, deliver a consistent message. That's the key, is delivery of a consistent message so students aren't bouncing all over campus getting different answers, and making sure they know that they can go to any one of these advising opportunities and receive a consistent result. So, in summary, I'd say that the pilot is definitely up and running. We didn't really kick things off until June of last year. We spent the first year recruiting schools. We had a couple of schools that were interested initially, then were no longer able to participate, so we had to kind of backtrack and get a few new schools on board. But now we have 11, as I mentioned up front. As I also mentioned, some of the features are still being developed, but we've got 4 features that are up and running consistently at this point. We would like to be able to continue to modify those features as the pilot goes forward as we learn how to be more effective and learn how to reach students where they're really at. We'd like to be able to adjust things as we go on. As you all know, this is going to be a long-term effort because cohort default rates take a really long time to develop. You know, best case in a 4-year institution is 7 years. And so the pilot is approximately that long in duration, so it's going to take a while for these cohort default rates to develop. The good news is there can be some interim results that we can track in the meantime, things like behavior change, knowledge gain, those type things, and we'll be working to collect and deliver those results as we go forward throughout the pilot. So we're happy with the way it's progressing. The schools are committed and engaged. TG's recently made some updates on our side. We've got 2 dedicated school liaisons whose job is to do nothing else but go out and work with schools to make sure that we're effectively implementing these features. We're very happy to have those individuals as part of the team, and we look forward to being successful as we go forward. So, can I answer any questions?
I have a question, maybe Chris Murr might. How do you identify your at-risk students? What are you looking at, or what kind of assessment? You know who to refer?
I'll be glad to answer that question for you.
Yeah.
So I think the benefit for us in the pilot program is we've always struggled. I mean, we're like every other institution. You have a lot of priorities, competing priorities, and not enough resources. Well, TG basically took all of our data and did the analysis for us, and they broke it down into the highest risk populations. And so we developed a strategy based on that information. And what's interesting, too, and really got the attention of a lot of our academics was the fact that based on discipline, the default rate may change. So we really came up with a prioritization schedule in terms of how to disseminate this information. And so TG really did that work for us. And so we started looking at people that were withdrawing or taking on additional unsubsidized or majoring within a certain discipline. And that really allowed us not to have to focus on all that data collection analysis, but then how are we going to target these individuals with these services? And I think the best piece, and you've addressed that, is the financial coaching, where we would like to take an hour and a half to visit with a student and help them develop a budget, but we are very limited in our resources. And so being able to pass over a very nice brochure and have the students go online and schedule an appointment is very beneficial to our students, but also to our staff, and allows us to concentrate on other issues. And what I really liked about it, too, was that TG took our call center staff and our counter staff and allow them to go through financial coaching based on their finances. And the difference in terms of their attitude was night and day. They were very much for it, but when they had actually gone through the process themselves and saw the benefit, it really made them better sellers of this service to our students. So I want to thank TG for that opportunity. It's really made a difference. And I think our biggest struggle is really how to market it to students. And I think we are going to be working really heavily this year on how to be more intrusive with our students and getting them into this service. Did I answer your question? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm curious, what has been your response from your students for the coaching? Were they willing to participate in this?
Well, I think part of the problem we have right now is we don't have that data because it is anonymous at this point. I think TG has that, so we don't know. But in the feedback that I get, people are very positive about it. Students, sometimes I'll do counseling when it escalates up and students are really struggling, and they walk away and say, I didn't know this was an option, I'll pursue it. And I actually schedule an appointment with them to come talk to me in a month to tell me how they've done. So I follow up with them on a one-on-one basis, but I think they're very receptive to it. I think they appreciate it. And I think our trick this year is going to get how do we get more students into it? And so I think we're going to be doing a lot more on-campus sessions, and we're going to be not necessarily targeting to people who are at high risk, but anybody who approaches us that we may think needs this service, and just trying to change the culture on our campus that not only are high-risk people need to be taking advantage of the service, but I think everyone on campus could be taking advantage of the service. And this has actually led, and I'll stop going on, but because TG comes on board and they really talk to cross-divisional staff, you don't have to do the selling of this product. And I think everyone on campus understands the importance, but I don't think maybe necessarily an academic advisor sees their role. And so now I think they've really sold that for us, so it's much more of a collaborative effort. And now we have our professional development series have asked us to develop a workshop for faculty and staff to start talking about default, talking about repayment of their student loans, and then hopefully over the next year, those individuals, both faculty and staff, will start working as agents and helping us promote financial coaching even more. So I think it's allowed us to start building some synergy on our campus and really changing our culture, or at least our focus for right now.
I'll address your question just a little bit as well. So, as I mentioned, Texas State's been one of the biggest proponents of this as well. We initially started out with 4 schools because we didn't really know what the volume was going to be. At this point, we've opened it up to all the schools in the pilot and are working with them to start promoting it. And I think we'll begin to see more and more volume as we go. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but one of the interesting statistics is we get about a 50% follow-through rate on students that come to us and schedule an appointment. About half of them are actually following through. So we'd obviously like to increase that, and we'd obviously like to increase the overall numbers, and we've got the capacity to do that. So we'd very much like to see many more students get counseled, because we do believe this is one of the most effective features. Questions? Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I'll leave my contact information. If any of you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and I look forward to coming back periodically and giving you additional updates as we go forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. All right. Sounds exciting, right? Yeah.
It is.
That's why George keeps talking about, we need to make this more than a pilot, right? He's been telling me that for a while.
Just say 2 things just to add on to what Chris was saying, and you're right, Lisa. This is a huge state, and we're, in my opinion, having been at TG doing what I do since October 1st, 1985, 30 years. And before that, I was in the legislature, and I helped draft the legislation that created TG. And there's no connection there, but I remember those. Nobody talked about student debt. Nobody talked about student loan defaults in the legislature until this last session, quite honestly. And that's where the pilot came from. Senator West was concerned about default rates, primarily at certain institutions, historically black, minority serving, and he wanted to do something about it. So Senate Bill 680 was the result of that concern, and it is very narrow in scope. As Chris pointed out, it's to produce better informed consumers. So that's what these features are all related to. It's to carry out the legislative intent of Senate Bill 680, to provide or to produce better informed consumers. And quite honestly, I think this pilot is more targeted at the student debt goal in the 60 by 30 Texas plan than it is reducing student loan defaults. If you produce better informed consumers, then maybe you'll stabilize or lower debt. So I think it serves two purposes, really. And hopefully the legislature will see the wisdom of having a program like this in a state which is so dependent on debt as the primary vehicle, financial vehicle for pursuing a higher education, far more than most any other state in the country. 60% of the aid awarded every year is through student loans, as compared to 50% nationally. But I would add, I want to add a couple of things to the presentation. One is that TG submitted this pilot to the Department of Education back in April as a proposal. We administer the federal fund on behalf of the Department of Education as a guarantor of the Federal Family Education Loan Program. We have a surplus in that fund right now. It can only be used to pay default claims. So we decided it would be nice if we were able to use some of the interest accrued on that fund for default prevention. and we submitted a proposal to the department. It's basically the pilot program. And we haven't heard back from the department yet, although we do think that that may come to fruition here at some point, and we'll be allowed to use some of our accrued interest on our federal fund to even expand the pilot to additional schools in Texas. So we think that this is a very worthwhile project, and we think it is overdue in the state of Texas. And we also think the student debt's going to increase in Texas. So it's just a big state, and with the closing the gaps and with the new plan and the demographics of the state, students are going to have to rely increasingly on student loans, and we think Texas needs a program that addresses student debt and student loan defaults, and we think the pilot is a good start. It's only a start, but it's a good start, and we certainly are going to continue to do everything we can and work with the coordinating board to make sure that this thing is successful, and we have a story to tell to the legislature, and hopefully if we are successful at accessing some federal funds to help support this program, that'll be attractive to the legislature as well. So yeah, I think this is a very worthwhile project. It's not just worthwhile, I think it's necessary, and we're going to do everything we can. I know the schools will too, to make sure it's successful. Thank you.
Other thoughts? Harold?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. Number one, how long is the pilot running? Through 2020?
Through 2020.
Okay. And just to clarify, this is open to any student who attends one of the sessions, who picks up the literature, that wants to call you, not specifically loan borrowers.
Right.
Right? Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you. Did you have a question? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, what I'd like to do is get through the next agenda item, and then we'll take a quick break. Everybody okay with that? Yeah? Okay. So the next agenda item, E, is to select a new vice chair. So let me kind of tell you where we're at, because this is kind of a unique thing that we're doing. We're doing now, and then the new committee will do in December again. But one of the things that has happened most recently is that Tom Malecki is no longer in the industry, and he was actually our vice chair for this past year, and at the end of this meeting would have taken over as chair so that I could move to Marcus's seat. And so so what we've got, because Tom is no longer he's not on the committee anymore. I think you all received an email from him. So what we need to do is, normally the vice chair serves as the vice chair, and then they serve as the chair, and then as the past chair. So this is a bit of a unique challenge in that the vice chair is going to be vice chair for probably another couple of hours and then become the chair, right? So, so that makes it, a little bit new here. And so what we need to do is we need to take nominations, and then what we'll do is, if we have more than one nomination, then I'm just going to ask you to write the name on a sheet of paper, pass it to the middle, and then we'll select. And anybody that's serving on the committee right now can serve as vice chair, even if you're rotating off of the committee. If you get elected as vice chair, then that starts the process over, right? Am I saying that? It kind of starts that.
Yeah, if you're elected vice chair, you automatically stay on to be your chair and your past chair year.
Yeah. So it would be a 2-year commit. So this is a 2-year commitment right now. Normally it's a 3-year, but right now it's a 2-year commitment. So does anybody have any questions about what we're trying to get accomplished in this particular agenda item? A little bit different than normal. Everybody okay? So I would like to open it up for nominations to run for vice chair. Marcus?
I'd like to nominate Delisa. I'm mad at her, so I think this would be fitting.
Delisa, do you accept that nomination? Okay.
Turn your mic on so we can record your yes.
Yes. I would actually also like to nominate Chris Murr from Texas State.
Yeah.
So Chris, do you accept? Oh, there you go. Any other nominations for vice chair for the floor? Selma?
I was also going to nominate Chris.
Okay, well, there you go. Any other nominations for this wonderful chair opportunity for the next person? It's actually cool, I will tell you, and there's a lot of cool things going on
It
with
was
what the
good.
changes happening. I mean, it's already been kind of a great experience to do that as part of the state, what we're trying to get accomplished at the state level. And then there's also a lot of really great changes happening, so this is a really great time to kind of walk in and Chad's probably sick of me anyway, so, right? All right, any other nominations? Okay, so here's what I'd like you to do. You just need a little piece of paper, and please write down your vote and pass them to the middle. And then we'll take a break, and then when we come back from the break, I'll let you know what the results are. Fair enough? Yeah, you can vote for yourself. Yeah, you can vote for whoever you're mad at the most. I don't know. Yeah, that's fine. And then that will be a 3-year term for that person to serve. So, okay, so let's take a 10-minute break. Believe there's coffee and, I don't know, if there, coffee and stuff over there, so please enjoy. Kolaches. And so please help yourself. We can stay on track. Okay, so as you know, a few weeks ago, we actually kind of did, I'm sorry, what? Oh, I'm sorry, duh, all right. The new vice chair is Chris Murr. So, yay! All right.
Chris, do you want to move down here?
Not yet. You're not done yet. So Chris will take over as vice chair for the next couple of hours, and then will officially become chair at the end of this meeting. So he'll be presiding over the meeting in December. All right, fantastic. Okay. So the next piece that we wanted to do was to finalize the nominations. As you remember, we held an email meeting, and I didn't close out that meeting because we're going to close it out now. What we did, just to remind everybody, we kind of looked at all the, and we're going to have another discussion. The next discussion is going to be talking about some things that we've been looking at as far as the rules, and probably we need to go in and look at some of the holes and the gaps that are there. We kind of uncovered that during some of our discussions. But what we need to do is we need to finalize those nominations, and we do have a couple of topics to talk about. We were trying to look at, if you remember, I kind of separated people into the groups to make sure that we had the right number of people based on the rules that we have right now. The only thing that we can't solidify right now are the high school representatives, because we don't have any nominations yet, right? Is that the only one we can't really decide today? So we'll still work on that. And so what we're looking at right now is talking about the 4-year public, the 2-year, and the 4-year private, and other. Those are the discussions we're having today, right? And then we also have some that are appointed people that come onto the committee, which also threw a little curveball to us, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. So can we talk about the ones that we know we can do, and then we can, right? The 4-year, how do you want to do it? I'm going to turn it over to Chad for discussion point. That sounds like a plan.
One of the things, as you all know, I'm only been here 6 months, so I'm still learning the whole process. 6 months yesterday, so made it through my intro period. So, but one of the things that I discovered was the realization, or in discussions with other people at the agency, that there's wide variety on how committee members are selected across the advisory committees. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at the agency level, is just to make sure, do we need more consistency? Is it okay to have different approaches and things like that? But, I didn't realize, again, I should have questioned, because I should always question as opposed to just assuming, because that's someone told me that's how it's done. I shouldn't have said, oh, okay. I should have asked about it. But one of the pieces that's important is that ultimately the recommendation to the board comes from the agency in terms of the committee membership, that it's not just something that's solely the advisory committee, but also that the agency needs to be looking at it as well. And in looking at the list of nominations as it came out just from the voting perspective, the one concern that the agency has is having 2 members from the same institution on the committee. Albeit there's a reason behind it, because one is based on being the TASFA president, while the other is, from the election piece. It does result in one institution having 2 representations on the committee, and thus another institution not being able to be represented on the committee. So that is something specifically that the agency would like, I would like you all to discuss, is to how best to approach that fact so that we don't have 2 individuals from the same institution for the coming year.
So do we want to talk about the specifics of what we're talking about here? What do you mean?
Yes, so
Okay.
basically, I guess I should clarify that more. The agency, or I would like the committee to talk about having someone other than Becky Wilson serve on the committee. Shannon Crossland will be serving 1 year as president of TASFA. Obviously, there's the opportunity for Becky to be nominated next year, at the point when Shannon isn't on the committee, but would like a different nomination rather than Becky Wilson.
And so what happened in the voting process is that for the four-year public, we had 3 people that were the top 3 vote getters, and we're trying to keep the number. Remember, we can only have a total of 24, and then we have minimums within some of the areas, right? And so what we talked about was, okay, and Mary has joined us. Hello, Mary.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. And so what we have is we had the top 3 vote getters, and Becky was one of those top vote getters. So we were originally going to, when Chad and I were looking at the numbers of how everybody voted, we were just going to look at the top vote getters, make sure that we had the right number. We were going to be at like 22, I think, right? 20, and then add 2 from the high schools would put us at 22, which is where we were this year, and we were going to keep that and keep the other 2 positions open. And so, but then in looking at it and then hearing from the agency, because Shannon is coming in as the TASFA president from Texas Tech, we need to regroup, because then that would put 2 people from the same institution on the committee. And so the coordinating board feels very strongly we should probably not do that. So now the issue is the next people on the list, we have what, a 3-way tie?
We have, across all the nominations, we have a 4-way tie. Arnold Trejo from UT Rio Grande Valley, Scott Mertz from Sam Houston State, Brent Williford from Blinn College, and Robert Marino from San Jacinto College are all the next top vote getters.
Okay. So we actually, with the people that actually have the top votes, we have enough representation from each of the 4-year, based on our rules, the 4-year public, the health-related, the community college, and the privates. So do we need to share with them who those people are already before the other top vote getters? Can we do that? So that they know who else has already, or do we need to vote on who's going to fill Becky's top vote position? Which would you prefer to do? I think we could go either way.
Okay. I only have the nomination list with me, so we'll have to fill in the blanks.
I have this. This is what, is that
Awesome.
okay?
But so
Okay.
pause for a moment,
Pause for
please.
just a moment while we confer.
Okay. Sorry about that. I had the vote list, but not the membership list as a whole. So from the original composition, based on what had originally been decided before needing to have this discussion, from the 2-year institutions, the representation we would have is Melissa Elliott from Vernon College, Carl Gordon from College of the Mainland, Sandy Jones from McLennan Community College, Rosario Juarez from Austin Community College, Harold, I apologize for the Whitus, I always say that wrong, I'm sorry, from Alamo Community College District, and Mary Gallegos Adams from TSDC Harlingen. From the 4-year publics, we would have Lisa Blazer from UTSA, Zelma De Leon from University of North Texas, Jeannie Gage from Texas A&M Corpus Christi, Carolyn Mallory from University of Houston, Victoria, Chris Muir, Texas State University, and it was going to be Becky Wilson from Texas Tech University. Then from the health-related, Delissa Fox from Texas A&M, and Kathy Sanchez from UNT Health Science Center. In the other category, Audrey Hernandez from the College Advising Group, and George Torres from TG. In the private category, Doris Constantine from St. Edward's University, Lynn Kenyon from Baylor University. Our student rep, Anna Drake. Our TASFA rep, Shannon Crossland from Texas Tech University. And then 2 vacancies being held for school representatives. That was the initial plan.
Question, as this is kind of being discussed, do we have a potential issue then next year with Harold and Allen? Because they will both be from the same institution.
Harold rotates off November 2017.
Yeah, we will.
Who is this we're talking about?
Alan Ahmad is going to be, he's the president-elect for TASFA for this next year.
Uh-huh.
So then he would be coming in, no, wait, what year are we in? Okay, so Shannon is going to serve from December until September of 16, and then Alan is coming in as the TASFA president for December 16.
Through November
And
2017.
so we're going to have that same issue because Harold and Alan are at the same, they're at Alamo colleges.
So because of that.
Now, I'm sorry.
I was going to ask a question. Would it then be appropriate maybe to have the rules where those 2 people do serve, but the committee member versus the TASFA president is not able to vote? So they serve their 3-year term, but they do not have the opportunity to double vote. Again, just as a...
Or the other way around.
During the year that you have 2 people.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to be able to avoid,
It's going to be constantly like
and
this.
it might, as we're finding, we don't know who's going to get elected next as the next president-elect for TASFA, and since that's a position that's going to serve for a year, this could happen again. It just so happens it's happening twice. So, and Harold's already on the committee.
Yep.
We can't
And
kick
Becky
him
is
off.
my spouse, so I feel a little bit peculiar throwing that out. But again, just as knowing that, who would have thought that this would come up, but now it's coming up twice in a row.
Yep.
So it's likely to continue.
Becky is not my spouse, but I concur exactly. It seems like an unnecessary complication that will arise continually.
Yeah. That's a good point, because we don't know who's going to get elected as the TASFA president.
I'm wondering if we want to table this for a moment to go to the next topic to talk about some of the rule issues so that we can kind of be thinking about all of those as a whole. We're still going to have to come back to this and solve this. But I think it would be good for us to talk about some of the other challenges that we have found in our rule if
I'm okay with that.
we're allowed to table stuff, right?
Is everybody okay if we table that for just, we got to finish it today, but, because we do have to get the list of names to the committee so that we can get everybody started in December. Is that okay if we table that for right now so that we can move on to because there's a lot of things in this next discussion about the rules and the holes that exist in our rules, okay?
Yeah.
And then this can also be another topic and figure out how we're going to deal with, because it's obvious that that's going to happen more than just this one time. Okay, fair enough? All right, I'm going to turn it over to you. You've got the rules.
Okay. Wanted to, as we've been going through this, and as Lisa and I have been talking about the nomination process, as well as when Lisa and I were talking about with Tom's departure from UT Austin and kind of how that impacts things, Lisa and I had some very interesting discussions because Lisa was able to bring the perspective of the background of the discussions that you all had. I was bringing to the table just a straight read of the information. As I looked at it, here's what I saw in the information. And there's a number of things that kind of Lisa's mentioned to me that kind of what was discussed and what actually got the intent versus the written materials might not be. It actually started, we were talking about Tom Malecki. Now, Tom's term was coming to an end after this meeting as his term of office. because he had not been, there was a group I had mentioned had not been reappointed when we started moving into this, so anyone who hadn't been appointed had to be confirmed by the board, so it was going to have to be part of the nomination process no matter what. But the question that I raised with Lisa was, currently in the committee membership and officers, it says that membership shall consist of financial aid practitioners, public school counselors, and other persons who can provide insight into the informational needs of students. We've consistently seen a challenge with the public school counselors piece of being able to get nominations. There's also the additional challenge with the public school counselors that the overarching provisions for advisory committees are such that the board shall solicit nominations and make appointments from such nominations for membership on advisory committees from presidents and chancellors or their respective designee. So there's not really a place for us to pull nominations outside of presidents and chancellors. And so trying to get school counselors as formal representatives is a challenge. Trying to get an other person nominated, there's the challenge because the nomination has to come from the president or the chancellor or their designee. And then what does other persons mean? I had said, well, from the standpoint of, if Tom's continuing to do consulting or things like that, would that make him another person? And there was like, well, we're not sure if that's what we meant with other person. And so what exactly does that mean? Another piece that I looked at that I raised the question with Lisa was, excuse me, we have at least 2 representatives from each sector of higher education: 4-year public, health-related, 2-year college, and private institution. And so what that means is that a third of the health-related institution directors have to serve on this committee because there's only 6 of them in the entire state. So we have 38 4-year publics, 57 2-year colleges, and 37 private institutions. And so it's been a challenge to get the representation from the health-related institutions because there's only 6 schools to choose from. We also have the piece of at least 1 student representative. If 2 are selected, 1 is to be from 4-year college sector and 1 from the 2-year college sector, which raises the question of, are we supposed to be looking for 1 or looking for 2, because the student nomination process is done centrally for all the advisory committees. So even advising that group, are we wanting 1 or are we wanting 2 from that group? I mentioned the school district representatives is a challenge. The TASFA president we've just identified as a challenge from that standpoint, and also from the standpoint that members shall serve for a term of 3 years. And the only exception to that is that student members will serve 2-year terms. So technically this 1-year term for a TASFA president doesn't fit within the rules that were written. And then finally, in terms of the presiding officer and the vice chair, when we were talking about, well, could you have an other person on the committee in the first place, there was definite feedback that I received that that would be okay, but we're not sure that we would want anyone besides a financial aid practitioner as vice chair and then presiding officer. But there's nothing in our materials that would prevent anyone from being, a school rep, from a representative from a school district could be, someone from another category could be, the way that we wrote these rules. And so Lisa and I have been talking about the fact that we think that at the December meeting, it'll be important to have kind of a solid discussion or another solid discussion about these to bring the new committee members in on the conversation, and then depending on where we stand on that discussion, whether we can make some decisions in that meeting or whether, set April as, is it April? I'm sorry, December, January, February, March, as the date that we need to have some new rules, because then those would need to be formally submitted to the Texas Register, et cetera. But currently our committee membership and officers definitely has some contradictions in it and some challenges to actually forming the committee and achieving the goals of what you all can contribute to our organization. So I'd like to hear your feedback on what I've raised. Oh, and Linda has some feedback too. So we'll start with Linda.
So just looking over the rules, it says that one representative from TASFA would serve on the committee named by the TASFA board. It doesn't say that it has to be the president. So I think you have some flexibility there, and then they can serve the 2 years or the 3-year terms. I think the 1-year term just comes because of the presidency. So I would encourage you to think about that. And then the other issue to think about is when a member drops out of their position, how does that mean that, so for Tom Malecki, for example, he represented UT Austin, and he vacated his position. Does that mean that UT Austin has that position to continue that, fulfill that slot, or do you start from scratch? And
Yeah, and I don't know, and I'm sitting here thinking about, while I represent UTSA, I was nominated, but I had to be voted on by the committee. I don't know, and I'm just talking here, right? I don't know that I would agree that just because UT Austin or UTSA submitted my name for nomination, it was decided on by the committee, so I don't think that they should just, I'm not just representing UTSA here. I'm representing State of Texas Financial Aid, I guess, is what I'm.
Representing a four-year
Public, so
school.
Right.
it's not, it just so happens that I'm here from UTSA, and that's how I got nominated, so.
and all I'm
yeah.
suggesting is you think about
How
a
we
rule,
can-
how to address that in rules. so
Right,
that-
we probably need to be more specific about how we would deal with a vacation, someone vacating the role.
Right.
Whether it's as a member or whatever, knowing that there was a nomination process. But I don't know that I feel like I only represent UTSA serving on this committee. From my perspective, I represent 4-year institutions, and when I'm looking at the makeup of the committee, so I'm gonna use a couple of us as an example. I kind of look at A&M is serving a different population than what I'm serving, so I might represent a little bit more low-income 4-year institutions. So when I'm looking at voting for people, when we've got a list of nominees, I'm trying to look up for not just people from 4-year, but when I'm looking at the 4-year, I'm saying, okay, so we need a variety of 4-year institutions, a variety of 2-year, and all that when I'm voting. So I don't just represent UTSA.
Yeah,
so
and
that's-
I would say that coordinating board staff strongly agree with that approach. I mean, that's what we try to emphasize with all of our advisory committees, that you're serving for the state of Texas, taking a statewide perspective, not just representing your institution. So we would wholeheartedly agree with that approach. We also like to make sure that, geographical representation is gender, diversity, all of those factors are taken into account. So, thanks.
One item I'll add to what Linda was mentioning was talking about how we want to, there is a provision for the replacement of people who vacate, but whether we want to take that further. Because currently, in the overarching advisory committee rules that apply to all advisory committees, if an advisory committee member resigns, dies, becomes incapacitated, is removed by the board, otherwise vacates his or her position, or becomes ineligible prior to the end of his or her term, the board may appoint a replacement who shall serve the remainder of the unexpired term. So without any additional details, it's simply left to the agency to appoint someone to the board to fill out the term. So if, as a committee, we want to provide additional guidance, we can do that in the Financial Aid Advisory Committee rule section.
I was just suggesting maybe the simplest way of handling that is go back to the most recent slate of candidates and look at the next highest ranked person that would essentially be an alternate, and just possibly put that before the committee for approval, or the board. Would that be reasonable? So
I'm sorry, for which part, Chris?
So if someone were to be, vacate their position.
Oh, okay.
Could we just go back to the most previous slate of candidates and that one that had the next highest score?
Perhaps, but in some cases, I don't know that we have to replace it, because technically speaking, unless it's a chair or a chair, and in this case, it was a vice chair we needed to do. But if it's, I think for simply serving on the committee, as long as we meet the minimum of the categories that we have, if we're going to keep those categories, we can have up to 24, but there's really no minimum. I don't think there's a minimum, right, to the number.
Well, the
So
minimum would be what we set here.
We
So
wouldn't even
At minimum, we have to have the 10 to
10.
fill all these
So
positions.
unless we are below the minimum or we aren't meeting that, those categories that we've identified, I don't know that we have to replace someone, Troy, we would have to go back to the vote. And especially if you're talking about, this was at the end of this particular year, going back to a vote that happened last year may not be, I mean, I think we could go either way on that, to where we could go back to that if we felt like we needed that representation. But I think the only reason why we would have to is if we weren't meeting one of our minimum quotas.
And I think those minimums would be the student and then the health sciences center. I think those are the only two categories where there's just an individual or a single representative.
Right now, or?
No, well, that serves on the committee.
Well, actually, health-related is supposed
Oh,
to have
then
two.
two,
That was
okay.
one of the things that
Gotcha, okay.
Chad brought up, that means a third of the, we do only have one student
One student,
representative. So
okay.
in that particular case, yes, we would have to, but that's an appointed, I think the student rep position is not a voted-on position, it's an appointed position, so. What other thoughts or concerns or questions? Yes, sir. George?
Yes. I'd like to make a suggestion for the committee's consideration. I will just leave this up to the committee. It occurred to me, and I've discussed this with James Patterson, TG's CEO, that for the purposes of this committee, it is a financial aid advisory committee, and TG would certainly be willing to give up its seat on this committee if the committee would like to replace or put another financial aid director or professional on this, in place of TG. We'd still be a resource. We obviously would still come to the meetings if you all need anything from us, just like Chris gave the presentation on the pilot. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on at the federal level regarding student loans, regarding student debt, regarding loan counseling. For example, a bill is going to be introduced in the next couple of days that will require annual loan counseling that actually mirrors the pilot in a lot of different ways. And we are using the pilot as a model with several congressional offices right now. So we'll be really busy at the federal level, and we're more than willing to be a resource to the committee. But it just occurred to us, some of us at TG, that maybe for the purpose of this committee, it would be better to have a financial aid director committee made up of financial aid professionals, and TG would just be a resource. And I would leave that up to the committee to decide one way or the other. Thank you.
And from a pure rule standpoint, in relation to what George was mentioning, we don't have any specific requirements that we have to have a certain number of other persons. And so there's nothing that says that, as a committee, we couldn't decide to pick someone other than George as a nominee. So there's no restrictions to us making that change.
And I will say, if memory serves, we had a lot of discussion about the makeup of the committee. I can tell you from my perspective, I really feel like the State Financial Aid Advisory Committee, as far as voting members, should be made of financial aid professionals and practitioners, and then perhaps others are more of the interested parties and come, because we had the discussion about ICUT and TG and all those different groups, Audrey as advising corps, high school counselors. While that feedback, and especially in light of the fact that we have a hard time getting high school counselors nominated, and there's really no formal process for nominating them, we probably need to have a discussion about who should be on the Financial Aid Advisory Committee, voting on the Financial Aid Advisory Committee, and then maybe that other interested party is more of an invited guest to provide feedback. I remember having that discussion because I was kind of one of the naysayers of having others. Not that I think that we're just should be all seclusive, but I think when we're talking about state financial aid programs, we should be kind of some of the decision makers on how we put forth ideas for policies and bring our voice to the coordinating board. Just my perspective.
Well, and I remember early on, there were like 20, 25 different organizations beyond the institutions that had maybe a stake in the game too. And this is not to diminish the input and the impact these other players have. Pilar has been phenomenal on the committee because she brings a completely different perspective, and I think that has guided a lot of our discussions and really decisions over the years. So again, just pointing that one particular role out, highly useful and beneficial to our committee. But I think looking at the rules and the comments made, I think there's some certainly rationale to review.
And I'm going to throw another cog in the wheel. Speaking as a past task force president, our task force president is here representing TASFA and the organization. They're really not here representing their school. So I'm still going through in my mind, is it really fair to say that if Alan's here representing TASFA, that Harold shouldn't be here representing his school or community colleges in general? I know that was one thing that I tried very hard to do, was make sure that when I was president of TASFA that I tried to give verbiage that would cover as much of our organization as possible and not narrow it down to just what I do at a community college. So maybe there's a little bit more thought that needs to be put in there. Just because they work at the same school doesn't mean they're here for the same purpose.
Good point.
So you may still want to look at the avenue of the TASFA president is not a voting member, but the person that's serving on the committee in this situation, like Becky and Shannon as a TASFA president wouldn't be a voting member. She'd be here representing TASFA. Becky is a 4-year representing Texas Tech as a 4-year, basically, and kind of looking at that. Because we all really are here to represent, the sector that we're kind of doing, whether we're 4-year or health-related or 2-year in that sense.
And that kind of matches when you look at our student rep. It's an appointed position, not a voting person, but provides feedback. TASFA could be that same kind of representation. They're here to represent TASFA, provide anything that TASFA needs to share, and it could kind of go in line with that as well. So,
Linda, since you're the rules person, is there anything that you are aware of in our rules about advisory committees as a whole that prevents having non-voting members? And if we have non-voting members, would they count towards the 24 cap?
Yes. So the 24 cap is statutory. So whether they're non-voting or voting, they are still members of the committee and count towards the 24. So the concern that the commissioner had about having two individuals from the same institution is that you're taking up a slot for another, representative.
But just for if we pursued something that the TASFA representative was a non-voting member, that's okay for us to build into the rules if
Sure.
we wanted to do that?
Sure.
Okay, I just
It
want to make sure.
doesn't take away the concern the commissioner might have for having taking a slot. So it wasn't necessarily about the voting perspective. It was about the slot that's available for the position, because we want to make sure, so I get that.
It's kind of a midpoint. You're not going to get 2 votes from the same school if we made it non-voting, but you could technically have 2 representatives to influence from the same school.
Well, like the statute says, one representative from the TASFA named by the TASFA board. It may, if the commissioner does have a concern, then the board can make a decision to identify somebody else from TASFA to represent on this committee.
Well, that could happen anyway, right? And so I guess if we were to stick by the, okay, we have the rules, and then we also have the agency has input, and if the commissioner is indicating he doesn't feel that we should have two of the same institution, then we would either need to say, okay, Becky might have been one of the top vote getters to come into the mix, so we're going to pick somebody else. Or the other solution is we tell TASFA you're going to have to pick somebody else because Becky actually won the vote. There's two ways to look at this. Becky won the vote and we can only have one Texas Tech. So TASFA, you need to tell us who's going to serve, because it is not specific that it has to be the TASFA president. So
They can't be out.
well, no, but then we would be faced with the same situation when we get to the next year. Then we would have to tell, if we go that way, we would have to tell TASFA, Alan cannot serve as the TASFA representative on the Financial Aid Advisory Committee because Harold still has a year to go unless Harold decides to step off and let Alan come in. I mean, if that's the way we're going to go, if that's going to, but that's going to be a constant because we never know who the next TASFA president. And a lot of times the people that are involved in all these discussions are the people that are also running for elected positions. So we likely will encounter this again. So I think we have to decide.
Four publics, four people on the committee from four-year public.
No, we have to have a minimum of two from the four-year public, a minimum of two from community. We have more than that, right? Minimum of two from all of the areas, right?
It almost seems like it's a moot issue.
What do you mean?
I don't think we have the problem that this is creating, this conversation. I'm not being clear, but, it's like we don't have 24 people coming to the meetings from this committee. Do we?
But I don't know that that's the problem, because even if they don't come, if they call in or whatever, they still are part of the committee. So the issue is the makeup of the committee. So if the committee, if there is an issue and we have two people from the same institution, even though one's representing TASFA and one is here representing the four-year schools, they're still from the same institution. So I'm not sure I'm understanding.
I guess,
No, I just want to make sure I understand.
I'm not being clear, but it just is a lot of talk about something that doesn't, I know it's an issue, but it seems like, oh, well, I'll just stop. I am in agreement that the TASFA president could be a non-voting member and allow for the other member to stay the voting member, and that the other representatives, like from the other categories, be non-voting, and that there's a 24 cap, on the numbers. And however you make that work, those are the limitations.
One of the challenges I just realized I hadn't pointed out yet as well is that this year we're trying to specifically leave some vacancies on the committee because we're working to get into the phased approach that we've kind of got a third coming off, a third coming on each time. But to do that, we did some last time, we're doing some this time, and we're leaving some positions vacant for the next time. We could bring in more members on this round and take us all the way up to 24, but that means that we won't have any vacancies next year to fill because everyone will have been on either last year or this year. So just so you know that's why there are some specific vacancies being left, is to try to phase this in so that we can eventually get to the point where we've got this rotation, of like 7 or 8 people each year getting elected.
I think I maybe would even say it as a suggestion to make the TASFA president or the TASFA member who's appointed to attend an ex officio member. We're here to get input. I believe the closest votes that we have had on any decision made was who the chair or vice chair would be. And I don't think that's something that we really need to spend a lot of time losing sleep over. The decisions that we have come up with and recommendations that have been made for the last umpteen years, for the most part, come down to a unanimous type vote, because I think we kind of we get to the same place. So it just, again, as a thought, again, the TASFA person is here. They are representing an organization, not an institution. And if their name is listed in the brochure, I think it needs to be not as an institution. They are representing an association. And by nature of them being here, that is the only reason they are part of the committee. Again, just trying to get us off the bubble.
Again, it's not just about voting, so that's the thing to keep in mind. Whether we make it a voting member or a non-voting member from the TASFA group, we potentially have two people from the same institution, which is the concern, right?
Okay. We've been talking about two people from the same institution. What about if it's from the same system? Is that a concern?
Any thoughts on that? I have my thoughts on it, but I'm a little bit biased, so.
Yeah, we haven't specifically talked about that. That's been running through in the back of my head on some of this stuff in terms of the next president as well, because I honestly don't know which college Alan works at, whether he's at the Central or whether he's on one of the, is he at the Central or is he at one of the?
Location for Alamo College.
Oh, he is a Central one as opposed to one of the, so, because some of the community colleges are, together, some of them are apart, so what if you have ones from two different campuses within the Alamo colleges or one of the others that has that kind of setup. So currently there's nothing specific. I mean, we have had multiple representatives from the UT system. We've had multiple representatives from, other systems within it. So I think that's a valid question to be raised, and one that, I can take back and have further discussions with the agency about kind of at what level are we comfortable or uncomfortable with dual representation, so that we can give some of that feedback as the committee looks at how rules might be revised.
And I do think coming from a system, and especially from a large system, you have multiple institutions with multiple makeups of their student body. So, like, for example, comparing UTSA to UT Austin, because having Tom and myself both serving, we come at things from completely different perspectives. So if we're representing the four-year public schools, he would represent more one group versus what I would have represented. So from a system perspective, I think whenever we're voting and we're looking at the people that have been nominated, I think we look at the institution and who they serve, what type of institution, the size of their institution, where they're located geographically, to make that determination. So I kind of feel like that's a little bit different than having two people from the exact same institution. And thinking about Alamo colleges, because both Harold and Alan work at the central office, that's a little bit different than, I don't know whether that would be different if we had someone from Northwest Vista and SAC both serving on the committee, how that would be different than, because they're both in San Antonio serving some of the same population, so.
Yeah, at Alamo colleges, we're all under the same umbrella. Everybody at those colleges reports to me.
Right, and that's the
With
difference
you and Tom,
then.
that's totally different.
Yeah, UT system, Texas A&M system, we don't report to one central financial aid guru.
I think my participation on this committee, even though I'm nominated by Alamo, I feel it's my responsibility to look at every issue from the lens of every two-year community college.
That's the point, yeah. Any other thoughts? Because I'm trying to figure out how we come up with a resolution right now in light of the current rules that exist. What do we do?
So, just adding thoughts out there. So, because I was just thinking about what I had said about the vacancies piece. I know that when I brought this up, I had specifically said someone in place of Becky Wilson. And I should have clarified that it could be just not having that nominee on there because we can leave some vacancies. I know one of the challenges was, well, who would we put in her place? Who is the next vote getter? Things like that. In theory, we could just leave positions vacant. As is, we're still, with only leaving the 2 vacant, we're a little lopsided. Our next year's nomination process is going to be. So we could choose to just have fewer nominations. If we were to truly try to get to, excuse me, the kind of 7 or 8 per year that we bring forward, then we should bring on next year probably 2 or 3 less than we're bringing on right now. So one approach to the resolution of this might be focusing just from the standpoint of how many do we want to bring on next year so that the following year we can bring on 7 or 8. And if we took that approach, then we would just be taking a couple people off our list as a whole, as opposed to the whole Texas Tech specific thing, which would allow us to have more discussions in December about how we want to modify our rules.
And so then that would buy you a little bit more time to really, in December, we could have that could be like the focus of that meeting to really talk about what the rules should be, give us some time to get that changed before the next vote happens. And that also takes care of, we would make a decision before Allen becomes, because if we decide that we don't want to have 2 people from the same institution in the TASFA role and the college role, then we can actually go to TASFA at that point and say, okay, you need to select someone else because Harold already serves.
I'd rather us just kick Harold off. I think that would be better.
I second that. I honestly think, though, it's a little unfair to a person who is elected to serve a 3-year term to bump them or make any change to their membership because of a 1-year rotating on.
But I'm not suggesting we would kick somebody off.
I know, but
somebody hasn't even been voted on yet, so.
Right, but you're keeping Becky from being on the committee.
This year.
Well, then she'd have to be nominated again next year, so.
From that standpoint, I will clarify, we're keeping several people from being on the committee, because if we went just with filling the vacancies, we would need to add 2 to 4 more people to the nomination list. So it's more, how many do we want to put on the committee for next year? Do you want it to be this, we fill the committee this year, next year we'll have no positions open, and then we'll kind of rotate it, every 2 years we're doing half the committee, and then we're doing no one in the third, or are we working towards? So I'm thinking of it less from the person, this particular thing I'm saying right now is about how do we want to structure the committee vacancies, because when we created these rules last year, we needed to get to a point where we've got the rotation. So it may be that we just put too many people in this round of nominees.
Yeah. We had 10 from the public 4-year, and with Becky, it would be 3 people, only 3. So, and I can tell you, in looking at it's not like the votes were that far off. There's other people that are just behind the vote that Becky got and Jeannie got. So it's not like we're not just, Becky's not the only one that's not getting on the committee from the list of nominees, because there were 10 that were nominated. So that's going to happen every year, especially in light of what Chad just said, that it's going to take us a couple years to get to the right makeup of the committee. And in the meantime, we also have to look at the rules. But we would like to have new candidates coming in every year, but it's probably going to take us a couple years to get there, because we maybe put too many people on there last year in order to have enough vacancies. So once we get to the point where we've got the right number of people rotating off each year, then we can bring new people into the mix every year. So that's a valid point that he made. To maybe that might help us with the decision that we need to make right now.
If we were to go next year with targeting 5 representatives from the 2-year institutions, 5 representatives from the four-year institutions, then the approach would be that Sandy Jones, the one nominee from the community college system, and then Becky Wilson from the four-year publics, we would remove both of those nominations from the slate that would be presented. And then we would have, because right now it would set us up with 6 from 2 years, 6 from 4 years, 2 health-related, and then the 2 privates. So if we went with 5 and 5, we would take both Sandy and Becky off of the nomination list to be presented to.
But then that means no new people come in from the community college. Is that what you're saying?
Correct, no new people. We'd still have 5 people on, and that's one of the challenges of when this was done last year, a structured plan was not put in place to make sure that the representation that you all were looking for would be implemented. So there will be some pain points getting to that.
So I guess my only concern about that is that we did have a list of community college 2-year institutions that were submitted, and then we're not going to bring any of them into the mix. I understand what you're saying, but I think because we presented it out to the institutions, the committee actually voted on those different groups. I would struggle with not bringing at least one community college in. So if that means that we have 6 community colleges and 5 4-year publics, I feel a little uneasy about soliciting nominations and then not selecting anybody from that particular group, I guess is my issue. Whether it be whichever group it was, it just so happens that it's the community college group. Does that make sense, what I just said?
I agree.
Yeah, there are more community colleges than 4-year publics. Is that correct?
Well,
We could look at the proportions.
If we were to decide today that in light of the issue that we have with the TASFA president, 2 people from Texas Tech to say, you know what, the only new ones that we're going to bring in are Zelma and Jeannie because they were the top vote getters, and not bring in Becky, I think I understand this. That would mean we would have 5 4-year publics, and then we brought in Sandy as a community college rep, we would add 6 community college. So it just means that there's 1 more community college representative than there are public 4-year. But then you also have 2 4-year private, so the 4-year is represented. There would be 7 people from a 4-year environment, 6 people from a 2-year environment. So you could look at it that way. I just would feel a little uncomfortable not bringing at least 1 person in, since we solicited nominations and this committee voted. If we weren't going to bring any community, we would have never voted for any. Or we wouldn't have solicited for any. We would have said, you know what, this year we only have vacancies for, that's my concern, from a perception perspective, I guess. Okay, so we need to make a decision, correct?
Well, we're technically on the discussion of rules agenda
okay,
item.
you're right. Yeah.
And so.
So is there any other discussion on the rules as far as any other thoughts we want to make today? Because it looks like we probably we've talked about some of the issues. Chad has identified where some of the gaps are, things we need to discuss. This is something that we can bring back to the December meeting, and that's going to be a big agenda item at the December meeting. Is there any other discussion we need to have on the rules right now? And then we'll go back to the nominations. Good? So we're going to, what else?
Wouldn't this issue be resolved based on your comment earlier that TASFA not have another representative on this committee as opposed to the president?
But we can't. It could. That could be another way that we go. Because in the rules, right, Linda, it says that it's just somebody that TASFA says needs to serve on the committee.
Yes, you could go back to TASFA and say we need another
We could go
rep.
that way as well.
So, and I don't know, I'm just going to throw this out there so we could maybe put this to bed the rest, today, we could get over this and move on. But, so I'm on the TASFA board right now. Could I serve as that representative as an addition to the role I'm playing or not, since I'm still on the committee?
Well, I think the TASFA board would have to vote on that.
Right,
It's
I'm
not
just
our
saying,
decision
but-
to make. TASFA
right.
would have to decide who they're because it really is up to TASFA. It's just been tradition that it's been the president, but TASFA would have to decide.
I agree that they would have to decide, but if they decided, would this committee allow to say that I'm kind of serving, I'm two things there? I don't know.
Two things, Health Science Center.
Yeah, you are. You're going to have like a triple.
So you can't do 3, but you can do 2.
So yeah, that is one way we could go. So
approach.
yeah. Okay.
To go back to TASFA and say, based on the membership, based on the nominees that were received, based on the review of the advisory committee, we would need a different representative from TASFA due to the institution. And then, I mean,
Because
that
the
would be
current rules
for,
right now, that's the
because of the
current
current
rules.
rules. So that's, I think, a key piece that I was going to mention is that right now that solves this. Then we'll look at our rules as a whole as to what do we want the long-term solution to be. It could be that that's the long-term solution, that, we decide that, that if the TASFA president comes from an institution that's already represented, TASFA needs to pick someone else, but it would get us past today.
And that way Harold gets to continue his term, Becky gets to start her term, and based on the voting that the committee did earlier, those people get to fulfill the requirements.
I feel long-term we need to fix it, so, because if someone is representing TASFA as the president, I would appreciate their ability to be able to participate in the committee for the long term.
Yeah, we need both a short-term and a long-term solution to
So the
this.
short-term solution that we're potentially, okay, wait, do we need to get off the rules discussion first?
Are we done? Did anyone have
Are we done with the rules
anything
discussion
else?
so we can go back to the nomination discussion? Is everybody okay with that?
I'm just going to mention that I'm going to go ahead for the next meeting and put together kind of the comments and the issues that have been related, as well as some kind of straw man language for you all to be able to start your conversation so that way we can get the new people up on board really quick, as opposed to having to have this discussion again, and because we want to make sure that we get things changed in time to be able to actually do next year's nominations. So
And
I will have that for the next meeting.
I do need to clarify, though, that the rules do not say anything about 2 institutions.
No, the rules don't say anything
I
about
just
it.
want-
The
I just wanna make
agency
sure that the
ultimately gets to
agency-
select the members, so.
So that's
Yeah.
just the thing to keep in mind. And so because of what happened, the agency is saying,
And I guess,
Yeah.
just to clarify, because you kind of brought it back to this piece, what I was talking about was the rules as a whole. We've identified over half a dozen problems with the rules, and so that's what I was saying, was I was going to bring
I
those
understand,
pieces.
but I'm also trying to clarify that while we may go in, the rules don't say anything about, okay, it's a moot point probably, so I'm just going to let it go. Because I was just trying to clarify that in the rules, we're okay, but with what the makeup would be with Becky and with Shannon. So it's just that ultimately, we're not the final decision makers on
Correct.
who belongs on the committee.
Correct. And
I
if,
didn't know.
and if that's something that we need to, put more clearly in the rules, then that's something we
do
can
that
add
later.
to the rules as well,
as of
to
right
make
now,
sure
that's
that
not the
everybody
case.
understands that.
Okay.
Well, okay, then.
They should do that within the context of the rule.
Correct, and I just want to clarify something from a rules piece, because we're getting a little bit off board. Nothing in the rules says that the advisory committee votes on the membership for who comes next. There's nothing in the rules that says that the advisory committee votes and determines who are the elected. That has been historically, for years, how it has worked within this committee.
No, it's only been like 3 years. We've never.
Well,
voted
you all
for-
have picked amongst you all have decided who is going to be on. How did people get on to the committee?
I don't even know, because before, well, the TASFA
TASFA
had
made
a
some-
3.
Okay, well then I will back up,
Yeah, we haven't.
and I'm going to go
it's like 2
straight
years.
with this, because there seems to be, we're now moving into a confused place, and I want to get us out of that confused place. Nothing in the rules states that the advisory committee will vote
Okay,
on the membership
gotcha.
that will be approved by, because quite frankly, we could present it to the Committee on Affordability, Accountability,
And
and Planning, CAPS, and they could say no.
And in the past, if memory serves, they solicited nominations from the institutions. Those nominations were brought forth by the coordinating board, and then the coordinating board picked the members. So you're right, that's actually what happened, and it just so happened at that time, TASFA, because that's how I got on the committee to begin with as the president-elect. I served a 3-year term with TASFA. So it always was the agency's decision back before. They still solicited nominations. That's been what's been continued. We were nominated, and then the coordinating board would choose who they were. It just, when we made the shift to having an actual chair, which we didn't have before either, Joe Pettibon was the first chair, I guess we made the assumption, apparently we made a lot of assumptions, but we made an assumption that then the committee would be voting on who should serve. So that may be up when we do the discussion. We may make a decision that if the agency is going to make the final decision, it may not matter what we vote on. So that's something to think about when we get there.
Well, the advisory committee's input would always be important.
Yes, I concur with that. Okay, end of rule discussion? Wow, that was fun, and I think we're all just hungry or something.
So now you just got to bring it back off the table.
Yeah, okay, so we are done talking about the rules. Is that right, okay, if we go back? Now we have to finalize the nomination, because we do have to do that today. Okay, so things on the table are that based on the votes, and if we were to keep the makeup at 22 members, then we would be bringing in, from the 4-year into the picture would be Zelma De Leon, Becky Wilson, and Jeannie Gage. From the 4-year privates, we would bring in Doris Constantine and Lynn Wheeler. From community college, Sandy Jones from McLennan Community College. Kathy Sanchez for the health-related from University of North Texas Health Science Center. And George Torres as other. So that's where the votes were, right? So we have some things to decide here on, I'm just trying to make sure I remember everything we just talked about. We could only bring in 2 publics, and then the current TASFA president, that's been the norm, would come in and serve. That's what we would be proposing, because we're proposing this to the agency, right? I think that's one of the decisions we got to make. Or also, George has also indicated if we wanted to bring in more institutions, he would remove himself from, I'm not really sure how we want to handle that part of it.
The things that I've heard you all mention, or that we've discussed, one was just bringing in 2 from the 4-year publics, so that there wasn't the dual representation. Another was connecting with TASFA to let them know that they would need to have a separate person other than Shannon on there. And then George has brought up the piece of giving up that slot, which could be approached in 2 ways. One, looking for someone to replace that slot, or leaving that slot open to help us get onto the third, because if we fill it now, then that's a space that's not available next year. So there's really 2 pieces. One, whether or not to push forward George's nomination, and then whether or not to push forward Becky's nomination. If Becky's nomination is pushed forward, then the agency would definitely go to TASFA and let TASFA know you will need to have someone other than the president this year due to 2 people from Texas. So if you can actually kind of put the weight on me, if you guys can decide whether or not you want to push forward Becky, and knowing that this is the action I'll take if you do put Becky on, I will contact TASFA and let them know that they need to provide someone else.
And I'm just going to open having served as the TASFA president and this is absolutely no reflection of Becky.
I'm going to take it personally.
Shut up. So I really feel like the TASFA president should be part of this committee, only because they're the leader of our state association. They bring a different perspective. So I'm just voicing my opinion on the matter. I feel like the TASFA president should be the representative, and that Becky, if we know that the agency does not want two people from, and that's fine, then Becky, we would either, if we feel like we need to have an even number of 4-year and 2-year, then we would need to take one of the other top vote getters and vote them in, or we just leave that position vacant, and then the two people we bring in that we nominate from the public would be Zelma and Jeannie. That, I just feel like the TASFA president really should be the representative, should be on this committee, voting or not voting, and then next year, that's a short-term solution. Next year, we already know we have that situation. Since we're going to be talking about the rules, we could potentially talk about, well, the TASFA representative, we can either decide that, I don't know, I just feel like the TASFA president needs to be on this committee in some form or fashion.
And I'd like to state again that I think that they serve a completely different purpose than a school representative. And is there anything in the rules, the state laws that say that?
No, I think, Carolyn, I think the thing that we have, okay, and this, having served as several different types of we've had some of these same discussions at the NASFA level, right? Because we have regional representation on the NASFA board, but the issue is when you're talking about any kind of advisory committee or board or association board, the issue that you have is we all bring our biases into the discussion no matter who we're representing. But we do have to remember that, like when I was walking in as the SWASFA representative on the NASFA board, I represent NASFA, not SWASFA. It just happens to be that SWASFA chose that their delegate would be the president of the association. And so even though we know Shannon well enough to know that she's serving as the TASFA, she's still there, and she's from Texas Tech, and it's 2 slots are being taken up from Texas Tech, and I think that's the concern. It doesn't mean that Shannon's going to come in and only talk about Texas Tech, nor will Becky, if
You don't
that's
know
the
Shannon.
case. So,
Okay. Could I throw something in here? I just got an email. I would prefer that Shannon Crossan serve as the role of TASFA president on the Financial Aid Advisory Committee, and I will step aside.
that would be
And that's from who?
Becky Wilson.
Becky. She copied both of us.
Okay.
So based on that, it sounds like. So based on that, Becky Wilson has declined her nomination to the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. So.
Okay.
So now the question is in relation to, George has asked the advisory committee as to whether or not they would like him to rescind his nomination so as to create the opportunity for a financial aid practitioner to join the committee in the future.
But it
Seems
solves an
reasonable.
issue when it comes to the nomination of that other person that we've talked about.
Well, I think George's was a separate issue. It didn't have anything to do with the Texas Tech issue. So I think if we've made the decision, if Becky has rescinded that nomination, we're going to put 2 people from the publics into the 2 people that got the top votes, right? George's issue, and so that would leave us with 21, 19, without the 2 high schools, right?
These are definitely 2 completely separate items.
2 separate
What George has put forward is providing for the Financial Aid Advisory Committee to have greater representation from financial aid practitioners over time.
Yeah, and I was just making a comment that if he does that, it does help us in other areas as well.
Okay, gotcha. I'm trying to figure out what it is we have to vote on.
George has asked for the Financial Aid Advisory Committee's input on whether they would like him to rescind his nomination.
Okay.
Would people like George to rescind his nomination so as to allow for a greater number of financial aid practitioners to be on the committee in the future.
Any
And
thoughts?
It's TG
TG.
instead of George, so nothing personal.
Any thoughts or discussion on that? Because okay, so I'd like to take a motion to, huh?
I have
No,
just
yes,
one
sir,
quick
Chris.
question, George. So it sounded to me that TG is really focusing much more so on the federal level? And so since we deal with
Yeah,
state issues?
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
So,
we're still a
think that-
resource for,
Yeah,
you know,
they're still gonna
and
be
we'll come
here.
to the meetings.
Yeah.
Sure.
I'll make the motion at this point.
Okay, Chris will make the motion that we accept George's, what is it that we're accept? Offer to decline his nomination. Any seconds?
I'll second that.
Selma will second it. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries, so there you go. And then, do we need to do anything else?
No. We just need to go on to the other item.
Okay. All right, I need to go back to my agenda now. Okay.
What did we decide on the community colleges?
Yeah, what did we decide on the nominations?
Yeah.
Maybe we need to
Who were
go
the final
just
ones?
The only thing that occurred was that George and Becky rescinded their nominations. Other than that, the nominations
So-
will go forward, which I'll read them to you so that you have them. Doris Constantine, Associate Vice President for Student Financial Services, St. Edward's University. Shannon Crossland, Director of Financial Aid, Texas Tech University, in a one-year FY16 appointment as President of TASFA. Zelma De Leon, Director of Financial Aid, University of North Texas. Jeannie Gage, Director of Financial Aid, Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Sandy Jones, Associate Director of Financial Aid, McLennan Community College. Lynn Kenyon, Assistant Vice President for Student Financial Aid, Baylor University. And Kathy Sanchez, Financial Aid Counselor at the North Texas Health Science Center.
That gives us 5 four-year publics, 6 two-year community college, and 2 private, and then 2 health-related, with Delisa serving kind of in a dual role there. Right?
Correct.
Okay. So that's the makeup of the committee. So are we all in agreement with the makeup of the committee? So do I need to get a motion to accept the new nominees into the committee? Carolyn, second.
Second.
Delisa, seconds. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. And we already talked about G. Okay, Chad, I'm turning it over to you for H.
I just wanted to give everyone the heads up that we are starting to already think about the next legislative session. So we're already starting to have discussions about ideas to put forward, and the board is going to be meeting for a retreat next week to talk about some of these ideas. Right now, everything is very loose, very just kind of what are the ideas that we think, so there's nothing set in stone at all yet. We want to look at some of the things that we think are important based on recent changes. So with phasing out of top 10% scholarship and the Beyond Time loan, need to think about, okay, well, what gaps does that leave? And do we need to think about adjustments to help address some of those gaps in terms of the populations that were receiving those? So we're looking at that. We're looking at issues like TEOG for bachelors, because there are community colleges that offer bachelor's degrees, but currently the TEOG eligibility runs out before they can possibly have completed a bachelor's degree, so wanting to try to fix that. Looking at things, some things within the Cal loan process to try to make sure that wording is in such a way that it ensures broad access to the program. and also looking at things like required credits and the like as to length of eligibility and those types of things. Everything, as I mentioned, is still very much in discussion at this point, but I just wanted to bring it up in case there's anything in particular that you think is important for us to be considering and talking about that might not have crossed my mind.
Carolyn just pointed out that we got to remember the discussion about the prior year that we had earlier. That's going to be a big part of some of the things that he just talked about. Any other thoughts or concerns?
But just Chris's suggestion about the 2-year allocation as opposed to the 1.
Right, and that will be part of that discussion as well. Anything else? Okay, next agenda item, CAL usage.
Finally, I just wanted to basically get your all's thoughts on kind of what's happening in the world of CAL. I provided everybody with a worksheet that staff put together of usage. And, you know, as you can see at the bottom, when you look at the year-to-year changes in terms of the number of students and the amount of money that's been going out, you'll see we have turned around a 2-year decline in the number of students that have been using CAL. And we've significantly turned around the gross amount in terms of last year. We were down in spending, or 2 years ago, and then in FY15, we're significantly up. We're already, FY16 is looking to be higher than FY15 is based on the preliminary numbers, which we thought would occur with the reduction in the interest rate and things like that it would be a more attractive loan. But I just wanted to kind of open it up to discussion of anything that you all think that we should be aware of at the agency as to kind of what may have been causing the drop in CAL usage, what may have turned the drop around. I was pleased to see that it's not that we're lending more money to fewer students. You know, even though we have a much greater number of students, the average loan last year was actually lower than the year before, which was, to me, a good sign. So it was really just to get your thoughts on whether there's things about the trends that you think the agency should be taking into consideration and thinking about for the future.
Well, I think probably the downward trend is probably because of all the changes that happened with private loans. And I know at my institution, we were sorting through because we couldn't advertise, and even though there was some fluctuation, it's a state program, so why can't we say anything about it? But yet it meets definitions of private loans. So probably the decline was we simply couldn't talk about it. And so therefore students didn't know. You kind of run that risk of violating federal policy. And so I think some of us have figured out, or we're continuing to figure out, the best way to do that, how to package and still meet federal guidelines. Lender lists are kind of coming back into the mix, and as long as the coordinating board answers our RFPs, then we can put that was a big discussion that came up with Be On Time. I think you might see even an upwards trend because we no longer have Be On Time for new students. So it's another really good, it's not as good, but it's a good option for students, because I think the CAL loan is a really great alternative loan compared to some of the others that are out there. So I really do think that downward trend really had to do with the whole federal, and it all happened during the student loan, it was right after the student loan wars of 2007. That's what our
student loan wars.
Yeah, national chair, past national, that's what Eileen calls it, the student loan wars of 2007. And having been through those wars, I would agree with that sentiment. So if you look at the year, it was right after that you saw that decline. It's not surprising to me at all. And so it's just taken us a while to figure out what the heck we can and can't do and how to do it, right? I'm still trying to figure that out. Any other thoughts on?
Well, I agree that was part of it. And I think with the alternative loans, the lenders that have been out there in the programs, and they've basically changed a lot, and there's fewer of those for the students and parents to go to. And then a lot of the changes that were made with a lot of those programs that allowed less flexibility, then the college access loan was still a really good option. And if you look, I mean, like on our alternative lender list, I mean, the college access loan is a good option. But I totally agree. I think it was right after the student loan war, then everything kind of hit. We couldn't say much about the program. It's kind of hard to then, lead people that way. But I think that, it will probably continue to increase, specifically with BOT going away, that we will see going up. And I know we just requested additional money because we kind of had an allocation that's nowhere near what we've had in the past, and we've already exceeded that at both Galveston and the College Station campus.
And I would encourage you to encourage your colleagues as well. If you need more funding on the CAL, if you're coming up at your allocations, do not hesitate to reach out to us for those allocations. They are, the way we did it, we picked the highest of your past 3 years, and we see that some schools have gone beyond that. It is more so a mechanism for us to project spending in order to make sure that we're issuing bonds at the right period of time and things like that, as to why we have allocations for the CAL program. Unlike the others, which are actual appropriations, the CAL is to help us make sure that we've got the funds available when they're needed. If you need more than that, absolutely let us know, and please encourage your colleagues to let us know, because our goal is to meet whatever demand there is for this product.
That is so good to know about the allocation. I don't know that I ever really fully understood that, so that's great. Thanks.
I try.
I know. Well, thank you.
And Ken has taught me very, very well.
Any other thoughts or concerns or anything? Good on that?
I have a question, and it'll show my ignorance. Is there anything happening that will change the way, the whole thing about the federal loan war, that it will no longer be considered the same as an alternative loan? Wasn't there some
That was
proposed
only,
legislation?
there is, not for the Cal loan, I don't believe. I think there was some federal legislation to kind of model the Be on Time, just when we repealed it, at the federal level. So George might be able to say more about that.
Well, there is that, yeah. Congressman Castro does have a bill that he's going to reintroduce, establishing a pilot program modeled on the Texas Be on Time program. But what Doris is talking about is there's been discussion about exempting certain public state student loan programs from the preferred lender list. But it's just been discussion. There hasn't been anything filed.
Linda?
I just want to mention that the commissioner just got back from DC, where he met with most of the Texas delegation about this very issue, and it's been on his agenda, talking to them for the last 4 or 5 years, however long it's been.
Probably, yeah, 7 or 8.
Yeah. And so, he gets really good interest and feedback, but again, it's an act of Congress that is taking way too long to get done. But it's on the commissioner's high priority list when he's talking to the Texas delegation in DC. And again, he just came back last week from that trip, so.
Any other questions or comments about the Cal loan? It really is a good alternative loan. It really is. Okay. Anything else? Okay, so that's all of our official agenda items. Are there any other agenda? Yes. Oh, okay. The next date. We need to pick the next date for our meeting.
And I'm kind of hoping December 10th will work for you all, because I was looking at the board meeting schedule as to when this room is available. Would December 10th work for folks?
Look.
When
Okay, I'm seeing a lot of nods. I don't
there's
know.
no
if
FSA is before that, right? Yeah, okay. So I was just trying to think of other conferences that would impact. FSA is before that. We've already got through TASFA, SWASFA. There's no other conflicts that, okay. That's a good date. I think you're good.
Okay, and just so that you all know, one of the changes we're going to be specifically making right after this meeting is we're going to start sending out a notice for when the next meeting is as soon as this current meeting is over. So rather than waiting to notify schools, we'll be sending out a notice within the next couple weeks as to when the meeting will be, and then do a 2-week reminder on that, so that way people hear twice about when the meeting is going to be. Our goal is as well to, in terms of the minutes, our goal is to be able to get those minutes out to you all within 1 month of the meeting. So that you have those and can provide input as well, so that if there are any small things that you notice, like we spelled TEOG wrong, we can get that fixed without having to use time, because you don't actually have to vote on that for us to fix the spelling of TEOG. So, but those are some very specific changes that we're going to make in order to get information out to not only you all, but the financial aid community, as well as the interested parties that have been identified. Right, in our rules, we had to identify ICUT and TAC and TESCUBO. How do you say that? TESCUBO?
Takubo?
Takubo? There's not an S in it. Takubo, to make sure that they are aware of those things. So just wanted you to be aware.
Okay, so I just have a question, and this is only, I don't know, is there anything in the rules that says that we have to vote on the minutes from the previous meeting? Because Robert's rules do not indicate that you have to vote and approve minutes from a meeting.
You approve them or you don't approve them. You don't vote on them. That's correct.
But they do need,
From a Robert's rules perspective.
so, but they do need to be approved.
You just, basically, yes, you vote to approve them as amended or not, and it's either they're approved or they're not. It's not a vote.
But you have to vote to approve
You
them.
just
I don't
are-
understand.
are-
There's a vote.
And it is, it's kind of peculiar how that's written, but it is not a voting item or voted item.
Okay.
Present them, and does anybody have any changes?
Well, there's just a vote. Okay, all right.
It is peculiar.
Because we stopped voting on them, I think, in one of the associations I was in because of that Robert's rule. I was just curious because it takes up extra. Okay. Are there any other agenda items that we need to discuss at this meeting? Yes or no? No. No. Okay, well then I would like to take a motion to adjourn.
Mayor.
Marcus, second. Harold? Everybody, all in favor? Aye. And I officially move from being the chair, and Chris moves to being the chair as of this moment. So welcome to the club, Chris. So thank
Something
you
Chris
very
had
much.
no idea of 2 hours ago.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Are not going, okay, Carolyn, who else? I'm trying to remember. And George, thank you for your participation in the group. I think
Anne's rolling off.
Anne is rolling off as the TASFA president. Marcus is rolling off as a forever member. And you're still here for one more year, Anna. Yeah, and everybody else, I think, is still here. So thank everybody for their year of service and for supporting me. So I appreciate that very much.